Good morning. I think it's 9 o'clock and we should get going. My name is Dan Webster. I'm a family physician, but I oversee the College of Human Medicine, Michigan State University, Traverse City campus. And so I welcome you to your health lecture series. It's a partnership that's been going on for about 3-4 years between MSU College of Human Medicine, Northwestern Michigan College, and Munson Medical Center. The goal is to feature researchers who can speak on a wide variety of topics of public interest. And we have a panel today of Dr. Rick Speier, Dr. Douglas, and Laura Linscott. So with that being said, let's introduce Dr. Rick Meyer. He's a developmental behavioral pediatrician, board certified in general pediatrics, with additional subspecialty board certification in developmental behavioral pediatrics. He's a smart guy. His training and education include medical school at the University of Wisconsin, completion of full pediatric residency training, and additional residence training in child and adult psychiatry at the Dartmouth Mary Hitchcock Medical Center in the University of Virginia. He has a special interest in neurodevelopmental and behavioral challenges of young children. He is currently head of the section of behavioral pediatrics at Helen DeVos Children's Hospital in Grand Rapids, and is an associate professor in the Department of Pediatrics, College of Human Medicine, Michigan State University. So with that, Dr. Rick Speier. Here.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here on this white morning.
There you go. Just right left.
All right, I'm going to move up a little bit so I can see what I'm talking about. I have a lot of slides on behalf of our whole panel here. I'd like to welcome you. Appreciate you coming out on this morning to be with us. The field of autism is a gigantic field, and it's an interdisciplinary field. I'm trying to be smooth with the slides while I talk here. That's not smooth. I have quite a bit on slides. I'm going to go very fast. What I'm going to do is touch on just some highlights about autism that explain some of the controversy and explain some of the reason that we've had so much of a challenge finding out exactly what may cause autism or what causes there are for autism, and then what we should ideally be doing about it. As you see with the little guy there, I'm going to go kind of quickly, and I'm just going to touch on some things. This is really a very well, I think I've got it now. The interdisciplinary of autism makes it both wonderful and very challenging. No one person knows all there is to know about autism because it touches so many fields of investigators, clinicians, other allied health people and providers. There's an intensity of information. There's this explosion of information and also quite a bit of misinformation that comes across the internet because there's been so much in the motion of people, families who are touched in a very significant way with many of their children, and we really don't have the antidotes that we'd like to have at this time yet and how to help them, although there is a lot we can do. We've gone from DSM-4 to DSM-5, so we went from really 5 conditions with under one umbrella of the pervasive developmental disorders to now one condition called autism spectrum disorder that really envelops them all. We've got, you have to have deficits in social emotional reciprocity, nonverbal communication, deficits in developing and maintaining relationships, and you also need at least 2 of these 4 items: stereotypies, excessive adherence to routines, restricted fixated interests, or sensory issues have been added. So you need 2 of those 4 along with the 3 that have to do with the communication and social interactive domains. Now the prevalence, as the CDC has been studying it in states throughout the nation, somewhere between 11 and 14 states, depending on how many communities participate when they do this. So they just published the 2010 data that has now 1 in 68 and it's about 4 to 5 to 1 boys to girls. No one's really sure exactly why we've had such an increase. The preponderance of the increase is the identification of high-functioning children. We're also identifying more minorities who weren't getting health care and getting in the system before. There's been a lot of changes. Most people in the field with whom you talk feel that a lot of this can be explained just by how we're applying the definition and the sensitivity to applying it, but most people also feel there seems to be something going on, because even with classical autism, even though that's relatively less than it was compared to high functioning, that we're still seeing a little bit more of that with time as well. So this, the school classifications, interestingly, where a lot of it started, there was no autism spectrum disorder classification in 1990 anywhere. And from 1990, 91 to 94, schools replaced what may have been cognitive impairment or developmental delays and things with children who actually had autism. So you went from extremely low to all of a sudden very big numbers. The one point I wanted to bring home to you is that autism, another thing that makes it challenging, is it varies so much. Children vary by the extent of the deficits they have in each of the domains we talked about, but they're also as different as everything that makes each one of us different. And they have differences in their impairment. You've got genius IQs, you've got profoundly cognitively impaired IQs. You've got different associated conditions, the genetics. There's so much that's been described about genetic influences with no one preponderance of a defect that explains it. The environment is different, not only in their homes, but also what they're exposed to. Temperaments are different, and they don't all have the same developmental trajectory that we're trying to understand. I just bring this up. These are the aspects of temperament, and as you can see, everything that makes a child who has an autism spectrum disorder different is the same that makes each one of us different from each other. So although these children have a tremendous amount in common, they really need a personal approach to how we care for them and how we address them. So you've seen one child with autism spectrum disorder, you've seen one child with autism spectrum disorder. I'm not going to say a lot about the evidence to support it, but it seems the preponderance of evidence you'll find shows that it seems to be determined in utero, and there's a lot of support for this, or shortly after birth, which brings into question, why do we have so much problem? Why do people think so strongly that things happen at the end of the first year and the second year are actually causes of autism? And I'll get to why this came about. Genetic influences, everyone agrees that's quite strong. We have environmental exposures. There's factors related to pregnancy. I'll mention fetal factors. And then it may be an interaction among these factors in any given child that causes that you can have a genetic setup, and maybe if you don't get the right environmental exposure or something, you don't have the result at the end. I must say also that I heard a man, Tony Atwood, he was one of the leaders in the field of Asperger's. Many years ago he talked about, and he insisted that we're all 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%. We see florid people who gain a diagnosis, but if you know, I often in therapy or in counseling with people say, you don't know how quirky people are until you get married. But we all have kind of our little quirks and unusual things that we do. People who have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder just have a little, some a little bit more, some a lot more. These things have all been associated with more of a risk for autism spectrum disorder, advanced parental age, whether the delivery is induced or not, and this may be signaling from the fetus, not a problem with delivering Pitocin or whatever in induction, prematurity, pregnancy spacing, pregnancies closer together have a little bit more high risk, thyroid problems, iron, folate, mothers who have diabetes during pregnancy, who are overweight, or who have problems with blood pressure, certain infections, medications, pollution, and there's even a study about precipitation that various areas in the Northwest that have more precipitation may be related to pollution, seem to have a higher prevalence. There have been over 60 conditions described that are either genetic syndromes, metabolic conditions, or neurological disorders that are associated, and the list keeps growing. It's a very heterogeneous field. Down syndrome has a very high representation of children who have autistic features, as does Fragile X, but up to 5 to 10% of kids have an identifiable neurological impairment, almost all of them associated with developmental delays, and they generally present with that before they present with autism. Still, even in the best of hands, only 10 to up to 40% of children can be identified to have a genetic, actual identified risk factor that can be identified in chromosomal microarray or chromosomes or whatever. But from doing pedigree studies, it's still felt that this is a strongly heritable condition. The identical twins have up to a 90% concordance for autism spectrum disorder, although it's been described as low as 30 to 60 in some studies. Fraternal twins seem to have, if you look at the aggregate data, a little more likelihood than just siblings. And these studies, it's interesting how broadly it can vary, but there does seem to be something about the maternal environment that increases the risk, as well as just having the sibling and the genetic setup. Interestingly, social and non-social traits can be inherited separately, and there's been a lot of publication lately about these sub-threshold autism spectrum disorder traits that you see in siblings or you see in parents, and this is the so-called broader autism phenotype that people write about, and these do seem to be more represented in the families. So we think it may be a loading of factors that may lead to somebody who actually develops a clinical diagnosis. Now, there's been a lot of talk about environmental influences, but what this statement from 10 years ago, a lot of people still feel true, that environmental factors acting alone, we don't have a lot of evidence for that there's probably some sort of predisposition genetically. One thing that made the field so controversial is that there seems to be about a 25 to 35% of children seem to show a regression where they seem to develop normally for a year and a half to 2 years of age, and then all of a sudden they would lose skills. And I even remember back when I was doing general pediatrics, seeing parents who would tell me my child was okay until he got his 18-month DPTs, and after that he was autistic. When we've looked at these now and you go back and you review videos, etc., it seems that these children were regressing over time, and the stories about a sudden change are really quite rare and uncommon. And a lot of people think now that regression may be the norm rather than the exception, and that regression may just happen earlier and more subtly. And sometimes you get frank regression, sometimes you just get kind of a developmental arrest in the social and communicative spheres. Whether you have regression or you don't, and it's obvious, these children are the same prognostically after age 3 or so as children who were kind of looking abnormal from the get-go. Anyway, this added to a lot of controversy because people thought there was some external factor, and why aren't people doing anything about it? The other thing that happens is some children have amazing progress, and it doesn't seem to be necessarily based on a particular therapies. Therapies are good for kids. They really help children. But there are some children who just take off and have incredible progress, and we're really not sure why. So we have this increase. You have those two other aspects I was talking about, and the emotion gets filled. This is one of the only pictures you'll ever see of a refrigerator mother, but this is actually a warm one who must have been kind to her child. I don't know if you know the theory, but back in the 60s, Bruno Bettelheim proposed that autism was actually due to cold mothers, because he was seeing the mothers of autistic children, and they all looked depressed. And what happens in autism is if you just watch normal parenting, the feedback from mother to child, from child back, it's just a beautiful back and forth. When you don't get stuff coming back at you, you start giving up. You don't keep doing and doing and doing. And that's what some of the therapies actually, why they're applied so intensively and with such energy over time, that feedback system really doesn't work. Anyway, he concluded this was because the mothers were all depressed, that the children were autistic. And then there were many people in the field who actually had children with autism, and they said this can't be the case. So there was a lot of emotion fueling this. I'm not going to try the pointer because I'll lose my slides. But if you look at the top two, the top trajectory is communication. The next one is social interaction. And this is the x-axis is their age, and the if I get X and Y axis wrong, it's only because it's early. Anyway, going up and down is how their communication is. I believe that's X. How strong their communication is, how close to normal. Being up high is close to normal. Being down is autistic. And the next one under that is social interaction. And this starts at age 3. And you see there's one group that's very low on both the slides that shoots up, that crosses, that has remarkable progress. And this was described in a study looking at a cohort of children in California. But this is where if your child was on a gluten, casein-free diet and he started getting better, you'd say, wow, that's the panacea. And that's where a lot of these reports came from. Anyway, so we have the immunization controversy and a number of things that come up that really have been strongly disproven. The other thing that I would say in looking at studies that's very important, as with a lot of behavioral research, is there's very strong placebo effects, so you always really need randomized controlled studies to make good conclusions about what you're finding. So we're only so good at identifying children who have problems, and there's a great and kind of tragic delay in diagnosis. Parents usually think there's problems by a year or 2 of age, and it's actually still probably over 4 that kids get diagnosed. So now the American Academy of Pediatrics has pediatricians not only doing their normal developmental surveillance, but also autism-specific tools. I'm not going to go through those questions or early signs, and I think I want to move on to the other contributors here. One book I would bring up for anyone who takes care of children with autism, the group from the Mind Institute at UC Davis, they did a study on this Denver Early Start model that's kind of a hybrid with a lot of ABA, but other practical interventions for children. And they put together a book for parents that's kind of, if you're a parent who can read and apply things through reading a book, this An Early Start for Your Child with Autism is really a wonderful contribution, I believe. I'm just going to say a couple words about therapies and then I'll move on. But many of these children have medical problems, and you have to be very careful to make sure they're optimal. When somebody gets constipated and they have autism, sometimes they get sent to a psychiatrist and placed on Risperdal rather than having their constipation treated. So you have to be very vigilant about making sure these kids are in optimal health. Also, the best evidence we have for therapies are the behavioral-based therapies such as ABA, that people shouldn't be, I don't believe, looking at a lot of therapies that are unproven at the expense of not doing the conventional therapies, participating in early on when they're 0 to 3, and in the school district, the intermediate school district programs thereafter, because the educational system really has a basis for how these children are cared. I think I will stop there. There's a lot that we could talk about with the medical and psychiatric approach. Most children with autism, however, need good care in the families, behavioral-based therapies, and help with life management for many of the children, and then you seek specialty care, as you will, as are needed, and that's why I think it's really important they have a quarterback either through the school or through the primary care office, and actually to have all those people connected is most important. Now, I know Sarah last night was taking care of her 9-month-old, so she's seeing development at its best and most important. One thing that struck me about 9 months old, until I had children, I didn't understand why at 8, 9 months they learned the word no, because they keep going places and you keep saying no, no, no. And so, hey, anyway, interesting how you learn pediatrics. Sarah has spent her work in the human development and family studies, done some great work with her career, been trained initially in Arizona, then were you in Happy Valley for a while at Penn State or Penn? You were at Penn. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to her to give her part of the panel now, please, Sarah.
Thank you. So before I start, I just want to give a little bit of background about myself, and I think the slides are going to switch over, or do I just advance and then they get there? Well, I'll just introduce myself while that is sorted out. My background is in special education. I worked with students who have very significant disabilities in Arizona for about 5 years. And so the students that I work with primarily were nonverbal and included a lot of children who are on the autism spectrum. So the group that I'm going to be talking about today is the group that really has the most severe forms of autism. However, some of the techniques that I'm going to talk about could be applied to children who have higher functioning levels of autism as well. So to start, I know that we talked a little bit about the prevalence of autism. We've seen this great increase, so now 1 in every 68 children have autism. And that is really significant when you think about the children that you may come in contact with, either educationally or medically. You're going to be seeing these children much more frequently. And so the area that I'm going to focus most on is communication and the challenges that are faced within that aspect of autism. So we know that there's this social communication component to autism, as well as these behavioral characteristics where they're engaging in stereotypical behavior or just unusual behaviors that you wouldn't see with typically developing children. Okay, good. All right, so when we talk about social communication deficits, we know that children with autism are displaying some of these early signs of communication challenges. So we have delayed or less complex communication skills. We have reduced frequency of requesting and sharing, and so we see these challenges with the people that they're interacting with daily. If they're not engaging with them, those individuals may not be as interested in supporting their communication inadvertently because they're not getting that feedback from the child. We also see increased echolalia. So for those of you who are not familiar with this is where a child would repeat a phrase or a word, and it could be either delayed, where the child might be talking about something that occurred a very long time ago or something from a movie, or it could be immediate. So you might say, Johnny, you need to go get your backpack, and they say, Johnny, get your backpack. Or you might have a situation like I had my first year of teaching. I was working with a kindergartner with autism, and he went to the window of my portable, because of course every special ed teacher teaches in a portable. So he walked up to the window and he started repeating what he would order at the drive-thru for Burger King. And I'm thinking, okay, we're supposed to be learning about ABCs, so you need to come back over here and learn about ABCs. In hindsight, I recognized that it was about 11:30 when he was going through this echolalia, talking about ordering chicken nuggets at the drive-thru. What do you think he was trying to tell me? He's hungry. He's ready for lunch. I was totally clueless. I had no idea. I'm like, we need to come. I don't know why you're talking about Burger King. We're not at Burger King. We need to do letters. I was unfamiliar really with the characteristics of a child with autism and the little nuances of what he was doing. So he was trying to communicate to me. I missed it. So these are the kinds of things that you need to be aware of when you're working with these children. They're trying to communicate something all the time. It just is in an unusual way sometimes. So that's an example of echolalia. We might also have behavioral challenges due to the lack of communication skills. If you couldn't get what you wanted or needed, you would start having meltdowns too. And that's what usually occurs with these kids. So sometimes we think, well, these kids are just challenging. Well, they're challenging because they don't have the communication skills that they need to be successful. And so sometimes addressing those communication functions can help reduce those challenging behaviors. And we see that a lot through different therapies like ABA. We also see a lack of social responsiveness. Maybe they don't even know how to interact socially, so they start withdrawing. And we see difficulty connecting socially with others. And that's a result of their communication challenges. If you're not sure how to navigate within communication, then you're going to start struggling socially. So about a third of individuals with autism spectrum disorders have communication challenges so severe that they require augmentative and alternative communication. So this means that they can't just use speech to get what they want and need to meet their daily communication needs. And augmentative communication can include a variety of different tools. This is primarily what I focus on with the kids who are nonverbal, because if they're not speaking, then we need to give them some way to communicate what they want and need. And so it can support expressive and receptive communication skills. As partners are using the tools, they can be teaching communicative skills, but they can also help the person express themselves. And we know that early intervention is essential. Just like developing language, it happens so early. These children need models from very young ages to learn how to communicate. One thing I will mention is that for individuals who are using augmentative and alternative communication, if they're capable of developing speech, the use of these tools has been shown to not hinder speech. So we're not at a risk of one or the other. We're really using these tools until the child has that speech come along, and if they don't, then we have a tool that's helping support their communication. So here are some examples of augmentative and alternative communication. I'm just going to call it AAC from now on because it's less of a mouthful, and that's kind of what it's called in the field. So I'm going to go through just kind of some of these different tools that might be used. Some of these require sophisticated technology, some require no technology. So there's really two groups of augmentative and alternative communication. One is aided, where you have to have a tool with you all the time to be able to communicate, and another is non-aided. So if we think of non-aided, these are things that you always have with you. If you use sign, you always have your hands with you. I don't know people who can remove them. So you have them with you. You can communicate whenever you need to. Same with things like gestures or facial expressions. So some people will say that that's preferable because it can't be taken away from the child and they can use it wherever. But those are much more difficult for other people, unfamiliar partners, to understand. So not everyone is fluent in sign. So if you teach a child sign, you need to have partners around them who can interpret for them. So there are some drawbacks to those tools. So we see one example of sign here in the middle for a non-aided system. So sometimes aided systems are preferable because they're more easily understood by unfamiliar partners. We see here a variety of different kinds of representation for the communication systems that are used that are aided. We might use picture symbols, we might use words, we might use a combination of both. Sometimes we have letter boards where the child can learn to spell, which is really ideal because then they have a huge access to a lot of vocabulary versus where we just stick to picture base. They only have what you've presented to them. You can use photographs, picture symbols. We have at the top kind of a combination where there's pictures of the individuals in the communication interaction as well as pictures that are taken from a computer program called BoardMaker that's pretty well used in preschool settings and elementary settings. We also have different ways that you can group the vocabulary, so you can have it in a grid format, which is what you see primarily here, but you also have what's called a visual scene display. You can do this in a picture format like you have here or a photograph. You could take a picture, say like you wanted to talk to the child about doing things in the kitchen. You could take a picture of their actual kitchen and then create hot spots similar to what you might have on a touch screen that you would use today like an iPad or such. And the child can then touch different aspects of that photograph or picture to be able to communicate about the scene. That makes a lot more sense for a lot of the youngest children. And as they grow and develop, then we start adding these other symbols towards the side that may not be able to be represented in a photograph. So maybe action kind of symbols or other words that we might need to add. There's also a variety of ways that you can access. I forgot to mention that most kids with autism are going to use what's called direct selection, where they just are going to point with their finger. But if a child has multiple challenges, including autism, they may use other systems. And I can talk to some of you about that later if you're working with a child with those needs. We can also use AAC for visual schedules. This is really helpful, especially for the autism population. We know that they may have challenges with behavior. They may have a hard time anticipating what's coming. So when we use these kinds of systems, we see benefits in reduced challenging behavior, in the child understanding what's coming next, and being able to be more independent. So we have a couple of different systems. Most of the time people think of this, they're thinking of what is our schedule for the day and how do we get from here to there. But it's really more complex than that. So we have one example of basically a morning or full day schedule for someone in school. the yellow one. And as the child goes through, they can pull the symbol off as they complete something and put it in the finish pile. A lot of kids love that. They think it's great to like be done with something and move on. You guys might do the same thing. You write a list, you cross it off, and you feel great about yourself. Okay, so this is just a child's version of what many of us do day to day. For those who really find that overwhelming, they might use something called first then, where you have a symbol of what you're going to do first and then what's coming next. And this is great for kids who have times where they really feel very frustrated about having to do a certain activity, or they have an activity that they really love. This can help break it down pretty simply. So maybe we're going to do speech therapy first, and the child really doesn't like speech therapy, but they know first we're going to do speech therapy, and then we get to go outside. And the kid's like, ooh, I get to go outside. You know, they're all excited. I can get through speech therapy if I get to go outside. So sometimes that is helpful, and a lot of times it's paired with a bigger schedule for a child to get them through some of those more challenging times. You can also use it to help a child when they have behavioral needs. So if you had a system of calming down for the child that you went through with them, you could create a visual schedule to help remind them of the steps, and hopefully over time they could become more independent. The real hope is that a child could then go access this themselves when they're feeling frustrated, and they can look at it and say, okay, first I'm going to take a deep breath, then I'm going to count to 5, then I'm going to rest in my chair. And they can go through those steps themselves. Hopefully over time that becomes internalized. They don't even need the symbols to help remind them. Also, when you're teaching a child complex tasks, we don't think of brushing teeth as complex, but for a child with autism, it could be very complex. It has many steps, even really probably more than the 5 listed here. You can break it down as much as you want and allow the child to see a picture, and you could take a photograph or use these picture symbols that are available as well to break down each step so the child knows what they need to do next. So these are just some examples of different AAC systems. They're usually tailored specifically to the child's needs and what they're doing. When we're talking about AAC, though, there's really a two-pronged approach that needs to occur. We need to make sure that we're providing intervention for the child themselves with autism, but also for their partners that they'll be communicating with. If we only teach the child how to do something, but the partners don't recognize that communication, then it's not going to work. And so a lot of my research focuses on these communication partners. Many times the children are working specifically with therapists or behavioral therapists to really learn those communication skills that are essential. And so my work focuses on helping the different communication partners, family members, educators, paraeducators who may be supporting them in the classroom, peers, learn how to recognize the communication that the child's doing and give them more opportunities to practice those skills. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about typically what communication partners do when they aren't provided with proper training. And unfortunately, it's not great. They don't provide great support. And especially when you're talking about a kid with autism, again, we said, if you're an adult and you're working with a child and you're not getting good feedback from them, over time you're going to give up. And you might be really gung-ho at the beginning. You might say, no, I can get through to this kid. I can do it. But if they're not giving you the feedback that you're looking for, behaviorally speaking, eventually you're not going to continue with what you're doing because you're going to feel like it's not working. And so a lot of these partners engage in behaviors that really aren't supportive to the child's developing communication skills. So first, they often anticipate needs. They may see the child make some kind of fuss or noise, and they just say, oh, okay, well, it's usually one of these 3 things. And we do this with babies, but over time, we get away from that. Unfortunately, sometimes we get stuck in a rut with these children. If they make a noise, we're going to go through, are they hungry? Do they need to go to the bathroom? And we're going to try to figure out what they need instead of giving them the ability to try to communicate those things as they grow and develop. We also find that communication partners dominate communication interactions. If the child isn't very good at communicating, we may feel the need to fill that space and not give them the chance to communicate. We may just talk and talk and talk and think that we're helping them, but really we're not giving them the chance to fill in at any point during the day. We might also limit communication opportunities. Again, if you have a group of children maybe that you're supporting, in my case I'm usually thinking of the classroom, if you have a child who almost never responds the way you would expect, over time you might find yourself inadvertently not calling on them or not asking for them to participate. And so sometimes we just limit those opportunities that we might want to provide them with. We might even fail to recognize communication attempts. Like I did with that child, I had no idea he was hungry. If I would have understood what he was trying to tell me, then I might have said, oh, I know you're probably getting hungry for lunch. We're going to go to lunch as soon as we're done with this. And we probably could have gotten through what I wanted to get through, but instead we ended up having like a 15-minute window scene for the drive-through. They also ask primarily closed questions, and I can understand the drive to do this. If the child doesn't communicate really long sentences, then they may think, well, they're not capable of doing that, and over time they just end up only providing closed questions, which is not a good way to develop great communication skills. So when we think about the research in this area, there's some research that says if we provide this training to communication partners, it not only impacts the skills of the communication partners, meaning that they learn the things that we teach them, but it also then impacts the communication of the child. So this is great news. When we're doing therapy or an approach with a child, we're really just impacting the child. But when we go through the communication partners, we're impacting those partners and also supporting that child. And then they learn to communicate more rapidly. Sometimes this takes a little bit of time for the child to understand that the dynamic has changed, that more is expected of them, and that they're supposed to be producing speech or communication during that interaction. But they do end up producing more. And these communication partners in the research are family members, educators, peers, and such. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the things that I teach when I provide these trainings, and then I'll wrap up for Lori to talk as well. Basically, when I provide these trainings, and in the past I provided them primarily to paraeducators, but I'm also now beginning a study that will be working with parents in the home to teach these skills. I talk about identifying different activities for communication. When is the best time to focus on communication for the child? It wouldn't be when you know they're going to hate something. So you want to think of the most motivating activities. And a lot of times this is play or something the child just enjoys doing, which is basically play. Okay, so when we think about those activities, we want to make sure during those activities, if the child requires AAC, that we're providing it and that we're providing the appropriate vocabulary for the activity so that they have access to whatever they might want to say during that activity. And during the activity, we want to make sure that we provide opportunities for communication. This could be asking questions, commenting about what's going on, or providing the child with choices so they have a little bit more say about what's going on in the activity. Then we want to make sure we wait for the child's communication. Remember, usually we dominate these interactions, so we want to teach the partner to wait, give the child 5 to 10 seconds to respond, and then once they respond, we want to support that by responding back to them. So the child says something. Sorry, I didn't realize there's a button at the bottom. The child says something, and then we want to support that by saying, yes, you're right. That's a dog. The dog says, ruff, ruff. And so we can build on that and learn and grow, help the child learn and grow. So the past research projects that I've done include paraeducators, like I said. In these studies, both the paraeducators learn the skills that were taught, and the children then in turn increase their communication skills. One was provided in person, and one was provided online. And the next project that I'm working on is with parents and trying to have them learn these same skills. I anticipate we'll see similar results. Again, this will be an online training that we'll be working with. Okay. And now I guess we'll turn it over to Lori. Or did you want to introduce her?
I was just going to make one point, because as you can see, it is better if they introduce themselves. What's fascinating in the field was a point I made earlier. You think of the richness of what Sarah just gave us and the depth of it, and how little understanding the medical community has for what the other disciplines do. It's really exciting to hear, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself then.
I'm just jumping in for you. Hi, I'm Lori Linscott. I'm the director of the Child Development Labs. I'm going to test my clicker. We'll go through that. All right. Thank you for your patience. Technology is a friend for children with autism as they learn to do it, and I'm on a delayed learning curve. So my name's Lori Linscott. I'm the director of the Child Development Labs at Michigan State University. We have 2 campuses. We have our East Lansing campus, which is an old renovated elementary school. And we have a campus in Hazlet that's part of a collaboration that we have with, I just want to go backwards. All right, there we go. This is our 10th year with our collaboration at Hazlet. In Hazlet, we have a collaboration with Head Start. They contract with us for 30 spaces. We have the Great Start Readiness Program, which is the at-risk 4-year-old program for the state of Michigan. We currently have 24 children enrolled in that. Hazlet Early Childhood Special Ed, 19 children, and then family tuition accounts for 35 children. And what Hazlet did is they had the self-contained Early Childhood Special Ed classroom, where if you have a language delay, you have no typical peers to learn language from. And then they had modules that housed their Head Start. So they passed a bond proposal to build an early childhood wing and partnered with the Child Development Labs to provide that educational setting. And we'd had a history of inclusion because our doors have always been thrown wide open to children with special needs. The staffing at our Hazlitt site consists of head teachers who have a master's degree in child development or early childhood education. We also had additional training through START. That's out of Grand Valley University, and it's the statewide Autism Training Resource Center, which really supported us in working with children with autism. Because coming from a background steeped in child development, sometimes what you do to best support children with autism seems counterintuitive to a child development background. Our student teachers are our assistant teachers, and what's really great about the opportunity that they have is that they will be going into the field. Our students are jointly held with the College of Ed, and they're getting their early childhood special ed endorsement. They'll be working in early childhood special ed classrooms, inclusive settings, kindergarten through third grade that have children who are typically developing and children with special needs in them. We also have our students who are child development preschool teachers who will be in Head Start classrooms, GSRP classrooms, other centers who have children with special needs. And they've really had concrete experience in working with children with special needs. We have an early childhood special ed teacher consultant who is in each of the classrooms, and they collaborate on Fridays talking about strategies that support children. At this point in time, our head teachers are really pretty stellar. In fact, we had a sub for a semester who was from the Hartwood, which is self-contained special education. And her highest praise when she finished at the end of the semester was the head teachers were like special ed teachers. I mean, because she was worried coming in, how would we be able to support children? We consult with the speech and language people, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and then because of our collaboration with Head Start, we have a wealth of support for families, from social workers, family advocates, nutritionists. So it's a very rich program that we have in Hazlitt. One of the things that we learned is that working with children with autism can be different and can be the same. All the assistive technologies that Sarah talked about are all strategies that we implement in the classrooms. And so as we look at how do you support children, many of the strategies we use are universal strategies that would support all children in the classroom. So when you talk about environmental supports, the little red chair is a backjack chair. So for some children with autism, what it does is it gives them their space. This is where I sit. This is my special spot at group time. I know where to go. I know where I should be. But there are also some children that we would have that we would say are typically developing who sometimes need that special support in being there. We've had children come in, and the concern has been, oh, they need a lot of sensory input. For some children, the occupational therapist does prescribe a sensory break, and it's built into their daily routine, but a preschool classroom is full of sensory breaks for children and helping children find those ones that best fit their needs. So whether it's the sand table or there's another area with a beanbag chair and they feel that support. There's adult support, peer supports, and as Sarah says, you know, there's some training in working with children to best meet those needs so that the children with autism actually have a voice too. We find that in our 3-year-old classroom, they're so egocentrical, we don't get much peer-to-peer support. About halfway through the semester, they start noticing that there are some children who are different or need some extra support at group time, and they're there to help out. But at the beginning of the year, no. We have activities that we write with extensions and simplifications. So it's not that there's this whole list of plans for a child with special needs and then a list of plans for children who are typically developing. We look at how we plan the day and how are we going to extend or simplify or make an adaptation for children with special needs, and then they're included in all the activities with all the children. Again, the use of visual schedules. We use the first then. Often we talk about a preferred, non-preferred. So as Sarah said, you get through that non-preferred, which might be you have to go to the writing table, or you haven't been to the puzzles, and then the preferred, you really like the sensory table, and we'll make sure that you have that experience. Really, when you talk about children's growth and development, using child preferences are huge in motivation, whether you're a child who's typically developing or a child who has special needs. So really getting to know the children in your class and how do you best plan activities and experience that they'll want to go to, and then that support that learning. We're looking at launching, I have to commit, we are committed to launching a new collaboration in the fall. We met with Josh Plavnik out of Counseling and Ed Psych, and what we're really looking at our East Lansing campus is the ELI Institute, Early Learning Institute. As Tony said, ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis, is an evidence-based, effective strategy in working with children with autism. And so what we're going to do at the CDL is we're renovating a room, and children will enroll 8 children with autism. They will spend half their day in this ABA intensive classroom. There'll be a board-certified behavioral analysis there who's training master-level students who are getting ABA certification. And so children will receive that ABA therapy. The other half of the day, they'll be in what we're terming to be a ABA inclusive classroom. So for that, they'll be in our inclusive preschool classrooms with head teachers who have gone through the START training and be able to look at what strategies support them in the classroom there. As we looked at people who are going to be ABA certified, they have 3 rotations that they have to do. So one of them will be in this intensive classroom, and what I see is the possible future in school districts is autism consultants, ABA consultants, and so how do we train that new future of ABA analysis to be able to work in a collaboration with a head teacher within a school setting to be able to look at children's needs and maybe do some strategies and things that support their development. All right. We wrote a mission for this program, provide the highest quality, evidence-based educational and social-emotional programming to diverse children with autism spectrum disorder and their families, because the families are a critical component, and become a national research training and practice model. It'll be really important for us to go back to this mission statement. When we started our collaboration in Hazlitt 10 years ago, we did a mission statement, and trust me, multiple times we had to go back to it. We were all very good intentioned, but we had different language, whether I came from the speech pathologist world, the special education world, the child development world, and we had to go back that our mission was working towards what was best for children and how are we going to communicate to get to that. And so we'll go back to this as we move forward with this collaboration, making sure that we are meeting our mission. I talked a little bit about how this classroom will be staffed. Again, children will spend half their time in the ABA intensive classroom and half their time in the ABA inclusive classroom. We've set up times for team collaborations on Friday morning. So it's critical when you have a collaboration and different groups coming together is that you plan in time for those meetings, for the communication, for the collaboration. Otherwise, you're off all in your own little world thinking you're doing the same things when the reality is a crash will be coming. So making sure that we can talk about the progress children are making or not making, how we might need to change strategies, and where we're going with that. Some of the things that we said were imperative to this collaboration. One is that we created and sustained a scientist-practitioner culture. And I would say that's one thing that we would say we do at the labs is evidence-based practice, and that we model research to practice. And so really being able to do the research on site and then be able to do it in practice as a demonstration site for others. We will train the next generation of providers. So I talked about the training the ABA analysis to go out into the field. But again, as I said earlier, we're also training early childhood teachers who will have their special education, early childhood special education certification. And so they will have concrete experiences working with children. Will they know everything when they graduate? No, trust me, I'm way past graduation. I still don't know everything. But will they know how to access resources and problem solve? Yes, and that's the type of thinker that we're having come out. we'll look at mediating socially significant and sustained change, that we want to make an impact over time, that the evidence-based strategies that we develop work, and that we're able to disseminate that so that others can implement. We developed a trifocal model. So one is the training the 21st century providers, whether it's the applied behavior analysis or teachers, serving the community to mediate change. And the community also really means families, and they should be at the forefront. One of the things that we've embedded in this program is work with families once a week on what are the strategies they have. We may have educational goals, we have the IEPs, but if I'm a parent, I have the goal, as Sarah said, how do I get my child to brush their teeth, or I have a hard time transitioning, getting ready to get out to school, or my child's going to visit the doctor, what's the social story on how they can be successful there. So really supporting families and supporting their children so the quality of life improves. And again, conducting the high-impact research so that we're looking at the different models that we've put together and which ones are showing promise, which ones have results that show children are making progress. Oops, I went too much. All right. Some of the research that we're working on setting up our first year is the homeschool partnership. Again, visiting with families, having that input, having families have an authentic voice in what happens. Sometimes it's due unto families as opposed to the family as a partner and working together to move forward and meet everyone's needs. Looking at the model development, you talked a little bit about the Denver model earlier. What will our model look like, and will it be replicable? Is it affordable to be replicable? Is it efficient and effective? We'll look at the ABA inclusion versus ABA intensive, though I don't think it should have the versus in there. It may end up being a continuum, actually based on the needs of the children, and the research that we do in this model development will give us that information. Longitudinal development, and then looking at genetic predictors for success. Right. And the other thing that's really exciting are the university collaborations that are taking place in support of this. So we have human development and family studies, special education, school psychology will be coming in, psychology and medicine. Keith, nod your head about that. You're a part of it. Yep. And then potential, we're looking at communication sciences and disorders. So as Sarah was talking about assistive and augmented communication devices, how do we support that? I'm really looking at the possibility of collaborating with communication arts. They have gaming, education and learning lab, the GEL lab. And so Sarah was talking about having iPads where maybe it's talking about the action jump, but nothing jumps there. And so we have a parent who's in that department at the CDL and looking at can they actually make them jump. And I think we can get some really exciting collaborations that way. Looking at engineering and then looking at business, because business will be a big piece of this as we move forward. When you talk about 1 in 68 children with autism, that is a huge financial impact. And so how do we get business involved and what role do they play as we look forward in that? That's all I have. Thank you for attending.
Are there any questions for Dr. Douglas, myself, Lori Linscott? We have time for that, I assume? Yes, sir.
I've got some questions. Everything that I've heard this morning brings up to date where things are at, especially for those of us who are touched by autistic children, which I am. Everything has been external. What's going on inside their mind? What's the problem with the neuronal patterns that take them from cognitive thought processes to word selection, verbalization, or vocalization of those word patterns? What's going on inside the mind? Are we dealing with aliens?
Dealing with what, pardon?
Aliens, people who can't communicate with us, and we're trying to get them to participate.
Well, I'm sure Dr. Douglas will have comments on this as well, and Lori probably sees it in her school, but there are many amazing stories of individuals with autism who couldn't communicate, who finally find a way, either with a tablet or somehow they find language or something happens to allow them to communicate. What's actually what they're experiencing, that when you hear some of them talk about sensory issues, or you even hear about Temple Grandin, that the way those who are very high functioning and verbal and can talk about it, they talk a lot about how they experience and see things differently. And it's very hard for people in the therapeutic world to get inside their skin, so to speak, to really understand. And that's why with communication, like you were talking about earlier, how something is expressed is going to be different from how it normally would express. The only thing I'll say before I turn it over to my colleagues is that the changes in the brain that get studied are not even completely clear on migration of neurons or connectability. There's no one particular finding, but there are abnormalities in the brain formation and the connectivity. But how they see the world, really what you're asking, and is one of the, I know it's often a frustration for the individual who's experiencing autism, because the world doesn't make sense, or we're not making sense to them as well. But you're asking one of the great challenges that we have. If we knew what was going on, we'd know a lot better how to help them. But with some children, you really can get awareness and get into what's making them tick and be able to connect with them. But it varies on all the things we talked about where a child is developmentally, cognitively, and how well they can communicate.
I think what's exciting about what's happening in the field of autism is we've been given many more tools to help answer the question that you're asking. So in the past, we didn't always have the means in which to understand what's going on inside the mind, and now a lot of research is going into functional MRI, where they can look and see what's happening. I think the challenge here is that when we're talking about individuals with more significant forms of autism, how do you convince them to sit still to conduct a study in an MRI, which is a really challenging thing. I know my two older kids have done studies where they're in the MRI. The noise is atrocious. It's really, really loud. And I see many of you nodding your heads. So you're familiar with this machine. Okay, yes. And getting someone who has these challenges to endure that long enough to get clear images is really difficult. So I think in the future, as we develop more tools, we may be able to better understand and answer this question. And that's why in the past, we've really focused on behaviorally based interventions, where we can do something, see how the person changes or does something different, and then we can go back and say, okay, now we're going to try this and see how their behavior changes. I think that's why that's been the means in which we can measure differences for individuals with autism.
I just have a comment about that. I'm Keith English. I'm the chair of the Department of Pediatrics and Human Development at MSU, and helped convince our three wonderful panelists to come show you some of the things that are going on at MSU about autism. But we have much grander plans for the future. We are planning to develop a much stronger program in sort of the basic science of why autism develops. And frankly, the problem is we don't understand enough yet about how brain development occurs normally. We don't understand the interaction between genetic and environmental factors and how that affects normal brain development. And we've got to understand that better before we can understand conditions like autism spectrum disorder, neurodevelopmental disabilities, et cetera, because we're planning to invest in neuroscientists who study brain development and then who partner with clinicians who care for children with autism and with researchers who are studying new therapies for autism. It's a big partnership, like Tony said in his introduction. It's so broad, and we have so much we need to learn, and we're convinced we'll never get there without this sort of partnership. So we have a lot of work to do to answer that question. It's a very important question.
Sir?
Hold on. Real quick.
While you're getting the mic, I was going to say an example of your question is if you look at the way even high-functioning children on the spectrum appreciate what's funny or what's humorous in a very different way. What we find funny or plays on words or things that we would yuck it up about, they don't find funny, and they'll find things funny that we don't find funny. And of course, you really want to laugh with them because you love sharing a laugh. But there's all kinds of different perceptions that people in different areas can identify, but that's just one little external example I was going to give.
Thank you. You know, in our regular school systems, you can think of it as a pyramid. All the children entering the school system is the base of the pyramid. At the apex of the pyramid are those children who are the gifted and who go on to do great things in school. And in our autistic community, we again have that broad base of all the kids identified as being autistic. And at the top of that pyramid, the apex again, we have a few who are going to be able to go into society with productive careers. My question is, obviously for all of us, we recognize that there's going to be a large bulk of kids who are going to have to be dealt with as far as placing custodial care or whatever else is going to take place. Overwhelming burden for parents. So from birth to age 18, you know, we've got parents who can probably deal with it, the schools that we have that can deal with it and so on from a behavioral standpoint. Beyond that, obviously there's a lot of years where people are going to need assistance, and it's going to be a tremendous social burden. And quite frankly, if we could direct it, recognizing that legislatively, we might say, hey, the alternative is to pour a lot of money into the early development, and as Dr. English pointed out, let's do the research, find out where things are going on. If we don't, if we're lax, we're going to have a huge social issue in the future. And just in passing, anecdotally, I've got a grandson who's autistic, and he's got a great sense of humor.
That's wonderful. I learned about, I'm a pediatrician, and we do assessments and we help take care for a lot of families, get them connected with the schools and things, but I really didn't learn about the experience of families until I was part of our local Autism Society, and I heard some of the issues you're dealing with, especially with older children, because while we focus on very young people, especially with early interventions, I don't think we can neglect those individuals in young adulthood and parents who aren't getting younger and have a challenge with children who are still dependent in what we do. I think this is one of the big questions we have therapeutically and also as a society for how we handle this ongoing. It's a very, very important subject, and it happens at almost all stages. I had a child in my office this week who came in, the dad plopped down, and I said, are you continuing with ABA? And the child had Medicaid, where they funded up until age 6. So this child was getting 15 hours a week. The child turned 6 and he got none. And so it was done. And that's just the way it's set up and legislated. But we have all kinds of peculiar things, and finding this to work in an integrated fashion over time is something we're all very interested in finding out more about and helping more than we are presently.
One of our professors who's in her consulting year has a son who's 26 with autism. And the last 6 years, even more, was looking at what are those living communities that will support our young adults with autism as they transition out, and doing some research and working legislatively trying to find ways to maneuver that, and it will be related to community. So when we talk about should children be in self-contained classrooms with special needs, or should they be included in the community, I have a sister, she just told me she turned double nickel, so 55, a younger sister, who has developmental delays, and really looking as a family, she was sent to another school district out of town. Well, she's a part of your community. These children are a part of your community, and so how do we work as a community in support of that? And it will look different based on the communities that we have, but really doing the research and looking at what supports young adults making that transition, and how can we support them moving on. So I absolutely hear what you're saying.
I know that there's some research that's going into how we can help siblings also support the child with autism within the family, because that's really going to be the longest relationship that they have throughout their lives. Once mom and dad are gone, they may still be here, and siblings may have to fill that role of helping support them if they still require some help. So I think that there's a lot of different aspects we need to look at. Obviously we need to help the kids when they're young and get them as much support as we can so that we can become more independent. But those who are unable to develop all the skills that they need to be successful will still need other types of support, and that's where some of those come in.
Maybe one more question.
Mark, thanks. If there's not another question or folks are done here, just wanted to extend an invitation. The Great Start Collaborative will be meeting momentarily here over in the Janus room across through the museum, particularly to the NMC students and who joined us this morning. If you have time and want to take some extra time, our panel's going to join us, and we'll be able to have continue the conversation and the set of questions and so on, and we would really welcome any of you, if you're not heading off to Dr. Overbaugh's class or needing to be someplace else, we'd be delighted to have you join us in the next few minutes, again, in the Janus room, which is the community meeting room across the gallery or the lobby from the museum. And again, thanks to everybody who took time out this morning, I think, to join us. Mark.
And who drove on those roads?
Great. Thank you.